Antimage and Isekai LitRPG Adventure, Ends of Magic Book 1, audiobook by Kevin Chapter 1. A long fall, I approve. Those were the only words Kia had spoken after she'd grabbed Nathan from the Adventurers Guild. They had climbed up through Gemor, entered the staircase inside the mountain, and headed back to the seal. There was a gate that blocked access to the stairs, but Kia had opened it with an enchanted key. It had been a few days since the solstice and Nathan's duel with Simla. The rest of that day hadn't heralded further surprises. The heirs had sworn variations of Nathan's oath, to fight to stop the endings themselves instead of merely protecting the people of Gemor from them. It had been a dramatic moment, to be sure. The other trainees, now adventurers, had stuck to the standard oath, but after Nathan's duel none had spoken against the heirs. The new graduates seemed to hold Nathan and the other heirs in even more awe than they had previously. And yet they were being shuffled into the standard adventurer operations. Yesterday the heirs had gone on an uneventful patrol along the Southern Transit Road. They had another scheduled tomorrow. Those seem awfully close together now that I think of it. Aren't patrols only every other week or so? Kia spoke again, pulling Nathan's attention back to the present moment. Your oath. I hoped that others would follow your example, start a new era of Gemor adventurers, but a river's path shifts slowly. I am glad that Kache swore the oath alongside you. You will do great things. She looked back over her shoulder at him, golden red braid catching what little light there was. Her eyes glowed a soft blue in the dark tunnel, and Nathan couldn't see her expression. Or you'll die. That's the adventurer's life. At least you would die attempting to slay a giant. Nathan nodded back to her, not sure what to say. He was pretty sure he knew why they were here. Kia was going to teach him the airwalking talent, or at least the start of it. He'd spent some time thinking about the events of the solstice. It was a lot to wrap his head around. The tales of ending had reverberated through Nathan's head again and again. He talked to the heirs about them, learning more details. Magic, gods, monsters, undeath, wrath, storm, deicide, elements, history, spite, and silence. There were still so many unanswered questions. The ending of elements had been the most recent, with a few survivors establishing Giant's Rest several centuries ago. According to a few second and third-hand accounts, the ending of elements had been a shifting conflagration of the natural elements, where a storm of fire gave way to dozens of feet of snow that was soon washed away by a torrent of water from the sky. How did anybody survive that for 3 generations? And Nathan had sworn to prevent the next one. The ending of history. If only he knew what that meant. The general consensus was that all of the buried history of Davrar would reawaken. All of the horrors from all of the dungeons would emerge and cover the land with myriad death. So Gemor cleared the dungeons and tried to learn how to counter the threats within. They built weapons, forged enchantments, and studied the knowledge of their predecessors to weather the storm that would be the ending of history. How did one go about fighting that? Clear all the dungeons? Nathan didn't know. But he'd keep an eye out for any clues about it, and prioritize developing his magic absorption. Except now, Nathan was hoping to pick up another piece of the build he'd planned for flight. If he was going to fight the mages of Giant's Rest, he'd need to catch them. Yeah, that's another thing I'm going to do. Protect a city, topple an evil empire, and save the world from a cyclical apocalypse. I definitely have direction. It feels good. Here I have Davrar, and its assistance means my only limits are my goals. But these goals may be too much. Nathan voiced some of his doubts, responding to Kia's earlier comment on his oath. It seems like too much sometimes. How can I accomplish such a thing? They were approaching the top of the staircase, and in the sunlight pouring through the opening, Nathan could see the fond smile on Kia's face as she gazed upwards. It was the most he'd ever seen the ferocious woman smile. Her response was warm, as if explaining a favored topic, with perseverance and dedication, the same way anything is accomplished. Stare the ghoul in the eye over and over until the ghoul is the one that flinches. You have lit this fire, and I have faith that you and the heirs will stoke it to a glorious blaze." Then they emerged onto the mountaintop, and Nathan was stunned by the panorama. When he'd been up here before, the sky had been dark, and he hadn't been able to see the world of Davrar spread around him. Now he could. The ruined city of Old Gemor stretched out below him in all directions, marked by roads extending in the cardinal directions. The city was split by a wide river that emerged from the eastern mountains, flowing sullenly through the ruins to the north. The river's path had once been marked by a broad canal and sculpted parks, but the water had broken its bounds on either side of the transit road, and the sections of the city surrounding the river were sunken and flooded. The only section of the old path that the river seemed to respect was the bridge that the space-compressing transit road used. Many miles to the west, the placid river curved around the solitary Firewatch Peak, a volcano that occasionally belched ash and smoke into the sky. From this elevated position, Nathan could just barely make out the village of Firewatch, which lay nestled into the crater of a cinder cone at the base of the volcano. Nathan looked around, trying to spot more villages from the amazing vantage point. He could see a few in all directions, but less than a handful of the 22 he knew were out there, and even those were smudgy dots, barely visible. But beyond all of that, the landscape of Davrar was revealed. Enormous mountains loomed to the north, snow-capped and rugged. In the very far distance, Nathan could glimpse even taller peaks, bereft of snow, that loomed ominously over their cousins. Those mountains were dark and cloaked in a perpetual gloom. The range marched down south, becoming less severe as it went until it petered into sandy hills that merged with the barely visible desert to the southeast. A dark forest spread beyond Firewatch Peak to the west, reaching north and south as it followed the Drakefish River and its tributaries. Just visible on the horizon as a light greenish smudge was the expanse of the plains beyond. Nathan shook himself from appreciating the view, hurrying to follow Kia as she walked across the top of the mountain past the seal. Nathan glanced at the horizontal, disc-shaped vault. It wasn't glowing now, or if it was, the bright sunlight was hiding it. It looked like a 20-foot-wide irising camera aperture set into the top of the mountain, deeply carved with intricate symbols. Kia led Nathan onwards, to the edge of the mountain ridge that curled over Gemor. Nathan approached the overhang carefully, where the stone curved downward sharply before revealing the city where Nathan had lived these past months. The armored warrior glanced at the drop. "I learned the start of this talent by accident in the mountains. I was knocked off a cliff by a castle bear, bounced a few times on the way down, frantically trying to use my faith to slow my fall. Almost died when I hit the ground. Broken legs, bones sticking out of my chest. Used my faith to heal myself." Her eyes turned back to study him. "I picked up the talent for mid-tier slow fall then. That's where you'll start. You will need to survive this fall." Seriously, Nathan blinked. He'd been offered low-tier slow fall months ago when he jumped over the back wall of the adventuring guild to evade imaginary agents of Giant's Rest, who hadn't turned out to be all that imaginary after all. Could I have avoided all of this if I'd just taken the skill then and ranked it up? Nathan decided to just ask. "I was offered the low-tier version of that talent months ago. I could have just taken it then," Kia exhaled sharply. "Dangerous. Yes, you could have, but that path would be longer than one starting at a higher tier." Her lips quirked. "It would also be safer. It is good that you know something of falling." She shook her head as if clearing errant thoughts. "The low-tier version of this talent is difficult to properly develop. It simply makes longer falls less dangerous and is difficult to train." "How often do you truly face long falls while in a fight?" "I have seen adventurers who knew my story take a decade to develop the low-tier talent to mid-tier. They never reached high-tier, let alone gaining the unique talent. Skipping the early tier is necessary. It is much better that you start with the mid or high tier version, which requires a longer and more lethal fall and the following insight. She paused for a second, as if thinking of what to say exactly. You must use your class resource to guide and slow your fall when you gain the talent. Do not push the resource out of you. It is not something you throw away. Your stamina is an internal resource. Use it internally. Use your stamina to pull your body in the direction you wish to go. It is inside you, pushing against your bones, constrained within your skin. Guide your stamina inside of you and use it to push in the direction you wish to go. She gestured to the cliff. The longer the fall, the better the talent. If you use stamina to control your fall, then you will gain the correct version of the talent, which will be at least mid-tier. I have brought you here because this fall is most likely to provide the high-tier version of the talent. And you wish to slay giants all too soon, do you not? The airwalking talent is unique and must be developed from a high-tier talent. Nathan gulped, then nodded. He did want to learn this sooner rather than later. He edged forward, looking down. The curving lip of the stone overhang they stood upon meant he couldn't look straight down, but it was clear that the ground was thousands of feet below, far beyond the terminal velocity distance. Nathan drew in a shaky breath, contemplating. He worked his jaw and reached out for his stamina, which was a hair below full after the climb. He practiced moving it around inside him, trying to feel for the motion Kia had just described. He noticed Kia moving around behind him. Do not practice. You do not want the talent for stamina-driven movement. She placed one armored foot against his back. Nathan had a moment of realization about what was about to happen, and then Kia kicked him off the cliff. Nathan spent a moment panicking and flailing for the ledge. Then he was violently angry at Kia for kicking him off a cliff. Then he stabilized his flight, locking into an instinctive skydiving arch. I honestly shouldn't be surprised. It's Kia. This is very much her style. Time to fly or die. Nathan grinned as he felt the wind rush past him and his mind snapped into a frenzied focus. He had to admit, skydiving without a parachute was one hell of a rush. The city of Gemor was spread out below on its steep hill. Kia had pushed him off the farthest point of the overhanging curl of stone, and Nathan would land halfway down the slope, not too far from Poppy's old alchemy shop. How do I survive this? I need to use stamina to slow my fall, just like Kia said. But I should also control my approach angle. If I come in nearly parallel to the steepest slope I can find, then less of my momentum will need to be broken by the ground. I will also need to activate rage right before the impact to get the toughness boost. But I need to not distract myself and drain stamina I can use to break the fall, and heal myself afterwards. Nathan had maybe 15 more seconds. He started cycling his stamina throughout his entire body, pushing at every limb, trying to move his chest and bones in the same direction. He angled his body to start flying towards the wall, hoping the downslope velocity would help reduce the impact. It worked, and Nathan almost overshot the slope to land on flat ground. But it was too late to worry about that. The ground was speeding up towards him. Nathan activated his rage, spreading the ember that forever burned inside him to every corner of his being with a moment's discipline. The thought of the lines of slaves trudging across the stream was all it took. Nathan threw every ounce of the furious energy that surged through his body into casting himself upwards. He would use his stamina to fly, to strike giants' rest mages from the sky. High-tier focused mind aid achieved. Nathan jerked his legs forward, trying to get them underneath him. He hit the sloping street he'd been aiming for, and everything became a confused blur. He impacted the ground at an angle, crushing his hip and driving bones into his gut before violently tumbling down the street. Nathan saw a pedestrian in his path get yanked out of the way by some unknown force. Then his head bounced off the ground, and his consciousness fragmented as he continued to angrily pinwheel down the hill. A short while later Nathan's thoughts coalesced. He felt like a pulped sack of flesh. Everything felt off, and while Nathan didn't usually feel much pain through Juggernaut's wrath, his entire body was screaming that nothing was right. His heart wasn't beating. He lay on the ground for a moment, his limbs at odd angles but slowly healing. His head was swimming and he was definitely concussed. He was splayed flat a short distance away from Gemor's outer wall. A box appeared before him and Nathan blinked woozily up at it. No going to sleep. Fix the heart first. Pending talent. High-tier slow fall. You have survived falling an extraordinarily long distance by using stamina to control your plummet. This talent will allow you to use stamina to efficiently direct your fall. This is especially effective for controlling the rate of your fall. Nathan directed his regeneration to his chest and head, wanting to dispel the sick and nauseous feeling he had. And to not die. His vision cleared, his heart resumed beating, and Nathan checked his stamina. Stamina, 122,650. That's not good. I'm still dying from massive internal hemorrhage, especially now that my heart is back to pumping blood around. Then the world seemed to bend and twist in front of Nathan's eyes as the whole city took on a dreamlike cast. Day changed to night, and cavorting figures surrounded him. One reached down and took Nathan's hand, which was suddenly whole and unbroken. The figures urged him to rest, reassuring him that everything would be fine. That's really not good. He blinked, noticing other discrepancies. His eyes squinted against the light of the sun shining into them, but he couldn't see it through a sudden layer of low clouds. And he could feel mana around him, both internal and external. Nathan focused on the sensation. He'd felt mana like this before, dream and light. This is an illusion. A damned good one, too. Tactile through dream mana, and definitely some look-away magic to make it harder to notice any slip-ups. Nathan drew deeply on the complex spell around him, draining the mana. His stamina rose slightly even as he kept healing from his fall. The illusion had been powerful. He rolled his head around, seeing nobody. The streets of Gemor were empty as far as Nathan could see. He furrowed his brow, looking up the street he'd bounced down. Nobody. He couldn't hear anything either, just silence. That's not right. There's another spell there. Nathan leaned further into his notice and his magic absorption, seeing a faint heat haze distortion in the air just a few feet away. He kicked out a foot and broke the barrier, quickly sucking in the mana from the invisibility spell which surrounded him like a dome, making him unable to see anybody outside of it. Mid-tier notice 7 achieved. Ah, the boy thinks. This is a good talent he has, yes it is. Or maybe just an intelligent person behind it, All of a sudden there was a figure hunched over Nathan. It was a short birdfolk woman, a crow. She was covered with black feathers and hopped from foot to foot as she studied him. Nathan had never met her, but he knew who she was. That's Gale Shullet, the leader of the Seven Fools, one of the other heavyweight adventuring teams of Gemor. She runs the Tower of Trickery. She's trained half the adventurer mages in Gemor. He opened his mouth and rasped out a question. Why are you here? Cocked her head and looked down at him. Kia asked me to help. I thought it a worthy time to meet you. If you survived, you never know with Kia. She threw her beak back and cackled harshly before snapping her face down to refocus on Nathan. I came to make sure you didn't land on anybody, and to channel you mana. Kia said you would need it, and to talk to you. All three at once seems a good deal, yes. Chapter 2, Insights and Intuition. Nathan stared up at the crowfolk mage, who looked back with beady eyes. Then, with the flick of her wrist, he found himself in a dark void, cut off from all sensory input. It was really just a complex working of light and shadow cleverly linked to his body, such that he wouldn't be able to escape it if he moved, which wasn't likely right now with all the injuries. Nathan absorbed the spell, using the stamina from it to keep healing his abused body. He was pretty sure his internal organs were all back in the right places now, but he still had a lot of shattered bones, some of which were poking through skin. He looked back up at Gale Shullet, the birdfolk mage looking down at him and chuckling in the back of her throat as she tossed a gnarled staff between her hands. "Real quick at that, you are. Try this one out." The world flipped. Nathan couldn't help but scrabble weakly at the ground to avoid flying up into the sky. His hands weren't working very well, and he would have screamed at his shifting bones if not for Juggernaut's wrath. He felt out the illusions and the more subtle manipulation on his inner ear and tore the spell apart. Glaring up at Gale, he spoke raggedly. "Not funny. Mid-tier spell sense 10 achieved. Congratulations, you have maxed out this utility skill. It cannot be improved any further. You must achieve insight into this skill to develop it to high tier." She looked down at him, beak slightly open in a faint grin. "Ah, is it not?" She glanced at the lip of stone Nathan had fallen from far above. "I suppose not." Then she gestured towards him with her staff and began channeling a continuous flow of light mana into his skin, fueling his regeneration more directly. Her face took on a serious cast. "You've declared your purpose here on Davar a few times, haven't you? Take down Giant's Rest. Stop the endings. Kia approves, but she would." The crow woman snapped her beak together with a clack. "I don't. Pick one. Either is a death wish, and Giant's Rest is here. The endings are not. Do not waste your potential, boy. Fight that which can be fought, and don't kill off a fine team of adventurers while you're at it." She leaned back, sighing and seeming to deflate slightly, though the mana flow never wavered. "But you give an old woman hope that the young generation has fire in it yet. Break this stalemate if you can, Nathan Lark. I want to see that city of spires fall before I die him. The spells I've let you study, consider them a gift towards that purpose." The black-feathered woman looked up into the sky, watching the armored figure of Kia descending towards them. "And I'm glad you beat Simla. Fool needed a solid kick in the nethers, poking his steel around where it didn't belong. Your origin is your own, and you've proven yourself to me." Kia's boots crunched down onto the street nearby, and she surveyed Nathan and Gale. He sat up to greet her, surprised that his body seemed to be more or less working. He watched a few cuts on his arms close up as bones settled back into place. Then he checked his stamina again. Stamina, 155 650 high-tier regeneration 8 achieved. Nice. I really can't wait to make a unique talent out of that. Gonna be sweet. Kia reached out a gauntleted hand to Nathan, and he let the tall woman in shining armor pull him to his feet. She looked to Gale as the mage stopped channeling mana to Nathan. "Gale, did Nathan answer your questions?" The woman tilted her head sideways in a very bird-like fashion. "Kia, I'm surprised he jumped, unless you pushed him." She tilted her head, studying Kia's stoic face. "You did, huh? Well, he survived. Glad of it." Her gaze snapped back to Nathan. "If you do take on Giant's Rest, know that many of the adventurers of Gemor will back you. We have not forgotten that part of our past so thoroughly. We just need an opening, a way for it to make sense to fight." Then Gale Shullet turned and walked away, blinking out of view after a few steps. Nathan looked around for the heat haze that would indicate an invisibility spell to magic absorption. He saw nothing. Kia sighed. "Look up. She likes to fly when she goes invisible." Nathan looked up, spotting a faint bubble of haze vanishing behind a rooftop. He checked his clothes. They were a mess, all bloody and torn, but they still covered most of his body. He'd pick up more when he got back to the guild. It wasn't like he wasn't used to walking around in torn and bloody clothes at this point. By now the Gemor guard knew who he was. I just hope I'm not getting a reputation for that. Let us talk outside of the city. There is more to discuss." Kia gestured, and Nathan led the way towards the gate that led out into the killing field beyond the walls. They passed through the long tunnel with a few words to the guards, promising that they'd be back soon and that Kia would keep a close eye on Nathan while they were out. Then they were back out in the sunlight. They walked across the leveled heart of Old Gemor, seemingly headed in no particular direction. After a little while, Kia shot a look back at the city and nodded. Her armor pulsed with light, which Nathan felt wash over him. Some kind of anti-illusion divine spell. Yea, spell sense. The woman's expression was serious as she studied him. "You have been offered the talent." Nathan read back the offered high-tier slow fall. "This talent will allow you to use stamina to efficiently direct your fall. This is especially effective for controlling the rate of your fall." Kia nodded in return, then continued walking into the ruins. "That is a good start, with the necessary requirement of spending stamina to slow your fall. You should accept the talent." "Congratulations, you have accepted the high-tier slow fall talent. It will become a part of your status and rank up as you use it. It starts at rank 1 and becomes more effective as it ranks up. Think about how you use your talent's functions to aid in talent development at rank 10. She started explaining, putting words together as she walked. "It is high tier as well, so you are closer to the unique development that is needed. And the ability to control not only speed but guide the path of your fall will make it easier to rank up, for it will be more useful in combat. You must find chances to use the talent to help you leap upon your enemies. That is your surest path to talent ranks." Kia faced him, chewing her lip as she focused on her explanation. "Now listen closely, for slow fall is only the first part of this insight and not the most obvious part. When you have fully ranked the talent, you should focus on the feeling of pushing your stamina around. Direct that ability into the soles of your feet, kicking down and against the stamina that is pushing back. It may be tempting to use your resource all over your body, to attempt to fly without the need for muscles." Kia held up a single finger for emphasis. "That would be much less efficient. Such a talent would likely be possible, but it would require hundreds of stamina for even a few seconds in the air. This insight will guide the talent development to provide a force that you can push off with your normal body motions. That will both be more efficient and will provide a much more versatile talent, which will allow you to make use of your strength and other movement skills that you acquired for use on normal footing." Kia nodded, considering her point. "I can help, when the time is right. As usual, developments are easiest and most likely when you are engaged with a dangerous foe." "If you have the opportunity, take it," she sighed. "Davrar enjoys such drama." Her focus returned to Nathan. "Any questions?" "I've got a few questions for Davrar, but let me think if I have any for Kia." "Could I also push with my hands?" Nathan asked. "I've only seen you pushing off air with your feet, but I'm interested in also using my hands. Is that possible?" Kia frowned, looking down at her hands. "I had not considered such a thing, given that my hands are occupied by my sword in combat. But for you," she nodded to herself. "Likely, yes. I believe the critical part of this insight is that you are pushing off your class resource, not having it push you. This may make the insight somewhat more complicated, but there should not be a significant difference in the resulting talent." Nathan thought for a moment, remembering each time he'd seen Kia using the airwalking talent. "Does the talent retain the ability to slow your fall, or do you need to push off the air with your legs?" "You do lose the normal ability to slow your fall, and it takes practice to control yourself in the air while you are already moving at speed. It is a common tactic among the guardians of Gemor for Dalo to throw me at an enemy, as you saw with the Grave Tangle. I am able to control my flight and slow myself as needed using this talent. Anything else, or are we done?" Nathan cast around for any more questions. "What about further developments? You have it developed past airwalking, don't you?" Kia shrugged. "I do, but those insights are their own and I am not sure I should share them." She saw Nathan's sullen expression and clarified. "Not because I do not believe I owe you the insight, but because I believe you may develop this talent in a different way than I have, with a different resource than my own. I do not wish to constrain your growth. I will talk to you about this in time, when you flex the airwalking talent yourself. My further developments are focused on efficiency and control, and I do not know if that is what you will need." Then she gestured at Nathan to follow her as they kept walking into the desolate ruins outside Gemor. "Come, I wish to show you something." They didn't go much farther, just near the edge of the killing zone, where the rubble hadn't been quite so assiduously cleared. Kia pointed to a specific mound of rubble. Nathan climbed over the pile of fallen stone, finding that there was an empty space in the middle. It looked like this building had been wrapped around a courtyard, and when the building had collapsed, the inner space had mostly been spared of debris. Instead, the floor of the courtyard was decorated with an intricate mosaic of bright chips of tile shining in the sunlight. It showed a flock of various species of birds in flight. Nathan didn't recognize the exact types, though he did notice that one of the birds on display, the silver darter, had been noted as aggressive and venomous in his Adventurers Guild classes. The mosaic itself was gorgeous, and at first glance seemed to show the myriad birds flying together in harmony. But the closer he looked, the more he saw the darker side of the artwork. The birds on the edges seemed to be pushing their way into the center. One bird was attacking another to reach the peaceful center of the flock, faint chips of brilliant red marking shed blood. The mosaic showed no source of the danger that was scaring the birds, but that only made the piece more ominous. And the craftsmanship was incredible. As Nathan looked closer, he saw that the birds near the edges were built of sharp, angular tiles whose irregularity seemed to convey their instability and panic. Closer to the center, the tiles were laid in smooth rows and orderly curves that communicated an undertone of stability and calm. Kia stopped in front of the mosaic, examining it. "I am always impressed. I could not imagine creating such a thing." Then she sat down on the rubble, armor scraping against stone. Nathan sat beside her as they both continued examining the mosaic. It was the sort of piece that you could keep finding details in the longer you looked. Truly a work of art. Kia's voice was soft as she continued. "This is a deed of a sort that I have never seen accomplished. In Gemor we make beautiful things, but they are often arms or armor or food." She gestured to the mosaic. "This work would require a legacy, a skilled craftsman training for much of their life. Insights passed down. Imagine the kind of society that could support such a thing, and for a floor." She looked over at Nathan appraisingly. "Maybe you don't need to imagine. I know nothing of your world beyond its nature as a source of insights. Did you have such things?" Nathan looked down at the mosaic. "Yes, we did, though this is special. It conveys a message." Kia nodded. "It does. It teaches of old Gemor and what they gave weight to. A society that loved beauty and guarded itself so well that it needed to use that beauty to remind people that there was a cost to their safety." She gestured outwards, encompassing the enormous ruined city around them. "You have seen the last dungeon of Old Gemor. You know what Old Gemor considered basic internal security for their city, behind layers of walls. And still, they fell to the ending of elements. They had the tale of endings, and still they fell. They produced art like this for many buildings, and still they fell." Kia turned to gaze into Nathan's eyes, and he saw golden flames holding him in judgment. "That is what you have challenged. You have the insights and the fire to challenge the endings. But do not forget the weight of the goal you have set for yourself. You have seen what the guardians of Gemor are capable of. We can protect Gemor. It is what we do. But to go forth and challenge the endings, you and the other heirs will need to be more powerful than we." Kia closed her eyes, hiding the consuming flames of her faith. They sat there in silence for a time, and Nathan considered Old Gemor. All pieces of evidence suggested it had been a large, cosmopolitan city. He looked at the mosaic and wondered what else had been lost. Did they have music, theater, poetry? It didn't seem much of it had survived. If what Sudriel had said during the tale of endings was true, it couldn't have survived. Even if the people had survived, could they have protected all of their culture? For the 3 generations of an ending? How could you keep alive the techniques involved in art, or all of the skills required in opera, or even the knowledge that such things had existed in the first place? And so Nathan grieved for what had been lost so thoroughly that it couldn't even be imagined. The beginning of a second ember of rage kindled inside his chest. He'd looked at the endings academically before. They were a threat to Gemor, and it seemed best to deal with them preemptively if possible. Much of the motivation behind swearing his oath had been his anger at the traditional adventurers of Gemor and their acceptance of the endings. But now Nathan saw that the endings had destroyed an unknowable amount of lives, of society, of civilization, and this was one ending, in one place. There'd been 7 before that across all of Davrar. Nathan looked up past the sun to the world which he knew lay beyond the sky. That was still considered part of Davrar, and presumably the endings happened there too. How many people had the endings killed? How much civilization had been lost over and over again? Who am I to attempt a task that millions have surely taken up before me, and failed at again and again? Nathan steeled himself. In a past life, he dedicated himself towards making advances in science to help alleviate pain and suffering, to push the barrier of knowledge forward. That had felt like the best way for him to make things better. The endings are a problem that can be solved. Maybe all I do is leave a clue that enables somebody else to pick up where I left off. Or find an insight that enables a few more people to survive the ending of history. But maybe I win, and I'll take either one. Kia stood back up. I will return you to the guild. Now that your feet are upon the path to airwalking, you should discuss your build with the other heirs and talk about how to counter likely enemies you will face. Know what you must fight eventually, but focus on the enemy you will fight tomorrow. She again pulled Nathan to his feet as he contemplated her point. And I need to hit level 81 before I start thinking seriously about Giant's Rest. Kia was silent for a time as they walked. She sighed before speaking. Sudriel wanted me to tell you that she will allow you a choice of missions from the board, instead of assigning missions as will be done for other newly graduated adventurers. Be careful, Nathan. She paused, then continued solemnly. This period before true responsibility may be the happiest time for you and the heirs. Level and gain in power, but do not seek to leave it behind more quickly than you must. Do not speed along your path until you are ready to bear its burdens. She might be right. I expect fighting Giant's Rest to be satisfying, but once I go down that road, then I'm committed, and it won't be clean. Chapter 3. A plan for the future. Nathan grabbed a set of fresh clothes before heading to the baths. As he scrubbed himself from the blood and grime of the day, most of it Nathan considered 2 things. First, he was growing ever more convinced that Gemor's culture around insights was harmful. He could understand why they kept secret the knowledge that could grant talents, classes, and skills. If you shared an insight broadly, it lost its value. Anybody could gain your power, and it was easy to learn your weaknesses. That could hamstring you both against true enemies like Giant's Rest and rivals who could challenge you to duels over politics. But Nathan could also imagine how powerful Gemor could become if they shared their insights. If every mage had an education like Stella, if every warrior could learn airwalking, if they stopped tracking debts for every little favor and actually worked together, then Gemor had the diversity of powerful insights to truly stand strong. Though arguably, the only reason they have such powerful insights is because everybody develops their own build, and all of the adventurers having one build means you could counter it. It's still worthwhile to try to open up the communication so that new adventurers can pick and choose their insights. But how would that happen? How did one change a culture? Guildmistress Sudriel seemed to be trying to tackle this problem over the long term, and Nathan wanted to help her. The training course had included several basic insights and several not-so-basic ones, but most weren't very powerful. The sole exception was the message spell, which Sudriel was pushing every mage to learn. That makes sense. Communication is one of the most important parts of any conflict. The second thing Nathan thought about was more imminent. He and the other heirs were planning to talk this afternoon about how to direct their builds and refine their tactics moving forward. And apparently what kind of missions they would take now that they'd been granted the ability to choose. To Nathan, this was part of a bigger decision, what they should focus on as a team, what kinds of threats they would fight. The Guardians of Gemor mostly focused on defeating monsters. They excelled at fighting brutally strong opponents who required excessive amounts of damage to put down. On the other hand, Stanel, Arl, and Sarah's father specialized in fighting people who carried weapons. He had a weapon for every occasion but was best suited to fighting other weapon users. The Seven Fools excelled at trickery and misdirection, but were underpowered for their weight class. They could counter the Guardians of Gemor but couldn't go up against a grave tangle. None specialized in delving dungeons. That was essentially a profession in and of itself. After finishing his bath, Nathan walked back to the heir's suite. They had a new one now, having moved out of the trainee building and into a different quarter of the sprawling complex of the Adventurers Guild. Their new and permanent rooms were a bit larger and had easier access to the main hall. The heirs hadn't left much of a personal touch on their new lodgings yet. Much of what they had done thus far was clear out the room of things left over from the previous team. That and clean off the thick coat of dust that Stella had mostly blown away with her powerful but imprecise wind spells. Sarah and Arl were already there, the siblings chatting softly as they did weapons maintenance. Nathan surveyed them for a second. "Do you two ever do anything other than keep your weapons clean and sharp? Arl, do your new swords even need it?" The handsome, dark-haired man was looking down the blade of one of the elegant sabers that were his primary armament now. This was the force-attuned one, though the enchantment wasn't active right now. The edge of the sword looked crystalline, and Nathan knew it could project a large force blade that was harder and sharper than any normal sword. It also doubled the cutting surface of the saber, making the elegant weapon's profile closer to a curved greatsword. Arl's other saber was across his knees. It was a twin to the first, except that the edge looked like a frozen electric arc. The master of melee looked up and met Nathan's eyes, one sculpted eyebrow raising. "I would know my weapons well, and that requires attention paid, something I see you do not do with your own weapon." He gestured with one hand toward the spear standing in the corner. Technically, it was Nathan's, gifted to him by Arl's father. It was a fine weapon, with a dark haft of sturdy wood and a finely worked gold-tinted spearhead. Since the spearhead was the only enchanted part of the weapon, Nathan could even wield it without breaking the magic if he was careful. But it really wasn't his weapon. Nathan wasn't especially good with the spear, and he didn't have any skills around its use. He couldn't use his antimagic with the weapon, and viewed it more as a stopgap until his bare hands could efficiently deal with larger creatures. But maybe that was something to reconsider going forward. Nathan might be able to develop his antimagic to work with weapons if he really tried. That talent's been advancing pretty slowly since it hit unique tier, but I'm hopefully coming up on the next development. Definitely something to keep in mind. Sarah looked up from her own work, smirking slightly at Nathan. "I think Nathan's a bit too direct for a weapon like a spear. He doesn't have the necessary subtlety. Did you see the duel against Simla? One side all skill, speed, and poise, the other just an unstoppable advance," she snorted. "Simla might as well have fought a siege boar in the open." Arl's twin looked very similar to him, with the same finely sculpted features, dark hair and coppery skin. She spun the chamber on the revolver she'd just finished reassembling, listening to the click-click as the cylinders rotated through their path. Sarah nodded, and the gun flickered into the bag of holding that served as her holster. Sarah was a ranged weapon specialist to complement Arl's melee focus. She reached back into her pouches and pulled out the rifle Nathan had given her, along with a rag, some tools, and a container of oil. Nathan knew the guns had enchantments to prevent fouling, but he supposed that regular cleaning was probably important to smooth operation and preventing rust. The rifle was a big weapon and took up most of the table in the center of the room as she pulled out the bolt and examined the chamber. Kachai walked in through the door. The large wolfman loomed, his nearly 7-foot armored bulk overshadowing Nathan's 6'5". His armor was a thicker copy of his mother's, and he carried a shield and hammer to Kia's greatsword. He'd recently picked up a larger bag of holding to store both items in when he didn't need them, which notably freed up the martial cleric of Damon in his everyday motions. His gaze swept the room, and the gray-haired wolffolk sat down in a sturdy chair across from Nathan. "We wait for Stella, then. She is learning message, yes," Arl snorted. "If she can focus on it. I bet Dragon Bones to stalk her teeth her parents can't get her to stop practicing her new mana types." He looked over at Nathan. "You really summoned the dragon with that, Nathan. There's quite a lot of chatter about Stella having 6 mana types before level 81. Sarah spoke without looking up, her focus on the disassembled rifle. "No blood from our wounds. I rather like having the best mage of this generation on our team." She looked up. "And the best cleric," Nathan spoke up. "I think you mean the only one. Kachai, why aren't there more who practice faith?" Kachai shifted, slightly uncomfortable. "It is a difficult path, and I was coached from a young age. The necessary insights are not common here in Gemwar. And you also all have the culture of not sharing even when it would benefit everybody. But then again, I don't want to just start telling mages how nukes work either, or exactly how my own various skills and talents work. But there's surely a better system than this one." They didn't have to wait long for Stella to arrive, the short mage barging through the door with a tray of baked goods. "I thought these would be a good addition." She had to put the tray on a side table, as the central table was occupied by the disassembled firearm. Stella's dark red hair was in its typical braid, tucked into the back of her heavily enchanted green mage robes. She pulled a pot of warm tea out of one of those pockets, demonstrating the incredible amount of dimensional storage she had in there. "Pockets for days. Jealous. Even when I have pockets, they tend to become not pockets during my first fight." Arl leaned back and directed his attention to Stella as she sat in an overstuffed armchair. "How is message going?" Stella pulled a face. "Not well. I'm learning to cast it with air mana and it's awful. That spell really needs shadow or dream mana. Dimensional mana is best, but that's not the one we have the insights for in Gemwar. Even void mana can be forged into a workable alternative. My dad can do it with air mana, but it's hard to learn to structure your mana over that kind of distance." Kachai hummed in understanding. "We all appreciate you working on it. Teams with message have quick communication with Gemwar and other teams. That spell will change how we are able to act and react while away from Gemwar." Stella sighed and cast her gaze downwards, biting into a pastry. "Yeah, I know." She looked sideways at Nathan. "Anything with you. My parents mentioned Kia was going to talk to you today." The rest of the heirs shifted their attention to Nathan. He'd been open about his desire to learn the airwalking talent for a while, and they wanted to hear how it went. After all, Kia had never taught that talent. She never taught anybody, with Kachai and Nathan being the notable exceptions, and bargaining for airwalking was expensive as hell. Lightning and magnetism for Stella, guns for Sarah, and I still suspect that the oath of endings was what made her agree in the end. Nathan grimaced. "There was also the fact that you had to fall off a cliff and survive to learn the talent." He shrugged. "Yeah, I'm on the path to the talent. I have high-tier slow fall now. It lets me control how fast I fall and guide where I land. We'll need to talk about ranking it up and using it in our fights." Sarah spoke up, starting to reassemble the rifle. "A high-tier talent. That insight must be worth its weight in adamant." Snorting, Nathan nodded. "I suppose you weren't watching the sky today. It almost killed me." The heirs looked apprehensive, waiting for Nathan to describe one of Kia's infamous training techniques. He decided to change the subject, not sure how much he was allowed to disclose. We should talk about what kind of missions we want to do. Kia just told me that we will be allowed to choose our own missions instead of having them assigned. I don't think we want to do patrols for too much longer. We should prepare for our eventual challenges. The patrol of the transit roads that led through Old Gemor was a standard job that was required of adventurers staying in the city and not actively completing other missions. Teams like the Seven Fools and the Guardians of Gemor got a pass, but the heirs had another patrol tomorrow. It was easy to see getting locked into a pattern of living comfortably in the Adventurers Guild, training, patrolling, and occasionally getting called on for urgent missions. But that wasn't what any of them wanted. It was a good way to stagnate. Arl started the conversation, looking around at the rest of the heirs, who he'd known he'd be adventuring with since childhood. We were generally planning to follow in the footsteps of the Guardians of Gemor, yeah. Take hunting missions, specialize in monsters and hordes. But now we've all sworn a somewhat unique version of the Adventurer's Oath to take on the most ancient of magics. How can we prepare ourselves for that? Arl's tone was questioning, indicating he didn't have any ideas. It seems clear, Sarah responded. We take on dungeons, especially from collies, ones with lots of ancient magic. Koch's brows drew down and he frowned. It is hard to dive dungeons regularly. Those sorts of jobs face the most competition and present much danger. The rewards are high, but dungeon diving is usually considered a vocation for teams that want to get rich quickly at high risk to themselves. They tend to specialize in little else. I do not think that is what we need. We need to learn a most difficult specialty, how to fight an ending. Nobody can teach us that. He had a point about the heirs not needing money. Stainel and the Guardians had provided a lot of basic enchanted gear for the heirs. Altogether, it was probably worth a fortune. They'd held off on providing powerful magic items that the heirs might grow dependent on, but showered them in things like dimensional storages and magical cooking and camping implements, and ammunition for Sarah's new guns. It wasn't like Nathan had that much use for money. His biggest personal expense was clothing. And jerky. He loved the jerky that Gemor made. Nathan shook his head to get himself back on track. He recalled the mission board he'd glanced at this morning. The most important missions got assigned immediately, especially those that were obviously time-sensitive. But there were dozens of missions that weren't so critical, and Sudriel was deliberate in assigning them. Usually they boiled down to, a scout from a village noticed something weird, go check it out before it kills somebody. He went through his mental notes on the missions he'd seen, speaking aloud as he thought. Let's break this down. Our goal is not so simple as learning to take on dungeons. That often relies on specific knowledge and research on the dungeon in question. But the endings, nothing is known of them. Nothing survives them beyond the tale. We may have to travel farther away to learn what is needed. We are going to need to deal with magic and tricks laid by ancient mages with methods unknown. Things where we can't do research ahead of time. Nathan continued. There's a famous text from Earth that discusses how to outthink an enemy. It states that all warfare is deception. We need to focus on outthinking an intelligent enemy based on minimal information. I don't think monster hunting will be very useful. We need to practice unusual tactics and solutions that will let us beat somebody smart who may be more powerful than we are. He looked up at the heirs, seeing if they had anything to contribute. After a second, Arl cocked his head. Tell us of this text. It's an old book, written thousands of years ago during a time of constant warfare. It's called The Art of War. It's as much philosophy as advice on war, but much of it tries to communicate a single idea. Nathan thought back to when he'd read it, back when he'd been an edgy high schooler who played too much StarCraft. If you know the enemy and know yourself, You need not fear the result of 100 battles. He kept explaining. The basic idea is that if you know exactly what the enemy is going to do, then no matter the relative power level, you can always make a plan that will let you win. But the trick is that the reverse is also true. A thinking enemy will always try to anticipate your next move and counter it. Good strategy must model the decisions your opponent will make given the information available to them. Unless your opponent is an unthinking beast, you need to know what they know. Nathan raised a finger, in lecture mode now. All warfare is deception. The way you guarantee your win is to outthink your opponent. The easiest thing is to ambush them, to not give them time to come up with plans. Otherwise, you need to deceive them, prevent them from having accurate information. Both ways, hiding information is the key so that your opponent cannot react properly. Stella frowned. I can see that being relevant to fighting Giant's Rest. But what about the endings and ancient magic in general? Can we trick that? It seems like we should be studying magic, both modern and ancient. I think my parents have some Kali's conclave treasures we might study. Those things are spellcasting masterpieces. I don't see how learning deception will help us defeat fancy magics. What are we going to do? Lie to a detect life spell? Nathan grinned in response. Those magical systems were set up by ancient mages, with multiple contingencies and failsafes, right? They tried to anticipate everything that might happen, to outthink us from the start while hiding how their mechanisms worked. They can't adjust on the fly, but they tried to account for all possibilities and weave that into their designs. We just need to see through their deception and come up with ideas they didn't think of, or trick the mechanism into activating the wrong contingency. He spread his arms wide. And the same is true for the endings. We don't know what causes them, but there's a good chance it's either some ancient being, an ancient magical system, or Davrar itself. We can outthink all of those if we do it well enough. We start by learning to deceive people so that we can deceive things made by people. Mid-tier lecturing 2 achieved. No ranks in identify, though. Well, that's not proof either way. Kachai spoke hesitantly. Let's hope it's not Davrar itself. He paused, considering. I understand your point, though I think Stella may be correct that research is our best path. He fixed Nathan with a wary eye. And we should talk further of Giant's Rest. Arl groaned. Anything but studying. Stella buted in, looking excited. No, I think Nathan's right. The origin of the endings is lost so long ago, not even a hint remains. We can't study it. We should practice against unknown magics, learn how they work and take them apart as we fight them. We've even got the perfect tool for the job. She gestured to Nathan. He glowered back. I want you to know that in Earth culture, calling somebody a tool is pretty insulting. Stella rolled her eyes at him. Arl was nodding along, happy to have an excuse to skip studying and go straight to fighting. Sarah was looking at the ceiling thoughtfully as she responded. That does mean that Nathan will need to take the lead on such missions, given his ability to survive the consequences of most magic. But that is fine with me. Kachai, the cleric frowned. He was nominal leader of the heirs and didn't seem convinced. He spent a moment putting his thoughts into words. I can see such knowledge being useful. Being practiced at tackling the unknown will let us survive when the unknown comes to find us. But I return to my previous point. What of Giant's Rest? He looked towards Nathan, clearly inviting him to respond. Nathan paused. Dallo had warned him against taking the heirs into his vendetta against Giant's Rest. He'd been hoping they would join him against Giant's Rest, but he'd already dragged them into the fight against the endings. Gale had said that 2 missions was too much. Nathan shouldn't bring the heirs into that fight. He didn't want to watch any of them catch a disintegrate. Nathan looked up from his reverie, addressing Kacha and the rest of the heirs. Giant's Rest is still my fight, and not yours so long as they do not attack Gemor. He sighed. They may come for us in the future, me for obvious reasons, you because they wish to prevent you from fully inheriting your parents' powers and insights. But if we specialize as we've discussed, then hopefully that prepares us well to fight Giant's Rest. We just need to keep our mental defenses in mind. The heirs nodded thoughtfully, but Sarah's face was thunderous. We should fight them. Kachai swept his hand to the side. Not yet, not for a long time. Their magics are beyond us. We cannot openly attack Giant's Rest or they would destroy Gemor. Stella looked up at him. All warfare is deception. The towering wolffolk looked back, frowning. Maybe, but I would not gamble with this. Maybe when we reach level 729 and are secure in ourselves and our trickery. He reoriented on Nathan. You have looked at the mission boards. Do you have a suggestion on what mission we should take then? Nathan nodded. I think we should take on ancient magic like we discussed. Is there a suitable job for us? Kachai's gaze was questioning. Nathan shrugged in response. There's a mission out by Bridgeguard. A pristine magical book washed up on the bank upstream of the town, near the warm falls. A villager tried to pick it up and was nearly killed with strange magic that grew mana crystals out of thin air. Since then, a bunch of crystals have started growing around the location. I don't know what it is, but I want to find out. He looked around for approval. It's a little ways out there, and the pay isn't so great, but that's because the book itself is assumed to be valuable. Or at least what it's made of. What do you say? Stella waved a hand dismissively. We'll see if it's worth anything at all after you get your hands on it, but yeah, that sounds good. I've never been to the Great Forest. Wonder if we'll run into a castle bear? Sarah grinned. I hope so. I think my skills will work quite well in a forest. Her brother looked surprised at how quickly Sarah and Stella had agreed. Arl shook his head. I think that fighting a magical crystal may not be the best for my skill set, but as Nathan said, we've decided to fight ancient magics. I'll have to get some practice at it. Then it was just Kachai. We do have a patrol tomorrow, he reminded them, up north again, but I think that leaving the day after tomorrow for Bridgewatch is a good plan. And with that it was decided. Before the meeting ended, Nathan had one more thing to say. Hey Stella, can we go practice throwing me with stone platforms again? I need to practice falling. High-tier slow fall 2 achieved. Thank you for listening to the story on KevinAudio.com. Chapter 4 New capabilities. The next day started early, as the heirs were headed out for a patrol. As on their blooding patrol, they got up before dawn to eat a quick but filling breakfast, and reached the gate by dawn. Their assigned patrol area was far out along the northern transit road, covering the very outermost edge of the ancient ruined city. They crossed the killing field outside Gemor to reach the start of the magical road. As they crossed the bridge over the river, Nathan once again marveled at the wondrous magic of old Gemor. These roads compressed space on them, or something similar, and allowed people to travel many times faster than they would without such capabilities, and without all of the problems that such a construct should have. And somehow, Nathan's antimagic didn't conflict with the space-bending effects of the roads. That was convenient in the present, but Nathan worried about what it would mean in the future. It definitely showed that he wasn't immune to all magic somehow, and while this magic wasn't harmful, it meant he had a weakness. Granted, a weakness to an ancient work of magic that spanned an entire city, but if Nathan's guesses were right, whatever caused the ending spanned all of Davrar and potentially worked on a level beyond space. Fate or prophecy maybe. So he'd need to work on that. Hopefully I can get sprinting and airwalking to the point where it's not a problem if I can't use the transit roads. Stella interrupted Nathan's idle thoughts as they walked. We should revisit the idea where I throw you with a stone platform. If you can control your exact landing point like in practice yesterday, then it'll be even more useful. Nathan nodded. He'd thought of that too. It will be a good way to rank up the talent. We should keep working on it. Do you think you could do it in combat if we found a good situation for it? The mage tilted her head from side to side, considering. I did it with Koch in the Mage Lord's tomb, didn't I? But it's harder with you, and we're talking about throwing you even farther, higher. And while I won't need to be accurate, I can't throw you way off course. She bit her knuckle. I think we should practice more first. That sounded like a pretty reasonable answer to Nathan. I'm looking forward to seeing how you and Sarah do if we run into anything today. I want to see your new tools in action. Arl glanced back, looking peeved. What about these slices of brightness? He brandished the sabers that appeared in his hands. Did you forget? Nathan shook his head. No, but I don't know if I expect anything to make it close enough for either of us to be relevant. After all, Stella can throw lightning bolts now, and you've seen what Sarah's guns can do. The swordsman lowered his blades. True. He sulked for a moment before the weapons disappeared into his storage. I do hope they don't end up leaving us behind in Davrar's eyes because they kill everything before we can engage. I don't want to end up half the level of my sister. Nathan tapped a finger to his head. Ah, but if that's the case, we aren't fighting challenging enough enemies. To defeat the true threats, we'll need to use every tool we have. My antimagic, your swords, and Kachai's faith. Though everything about him is so shiny it's impossible to hide from anybody. Kachai grumbled without turning around. His inability to not dramatically reflect the sunlight was something the heirs teased him about often. Sarah had a good rejoinder. We just need to put him where we want the enemy to look. The rest of us can steal the secrets of Kali's while the Vault Guardians all chase Kachai and his shiny metal tail. The big wolfman harumphed. Maybe I should consider another mobility skill. Nathan raised an eyebrow. Is that something Damon can provide? Kachai sighed. I do not know. I believe I am likely to delve further into the possibilities of faith than my mother has on her path, though it will take time and levels. I do not know what a divine movement spell would look like, merely that it would be very different from a spell cast by Stella. That made sense to Nathan. He sure didn't know what was going on with divine mana. It was self-motivated, almost intelligent. You gave it power and a purpose, and it went out into the world to accomplish its mission. Kachai's ability to direct and empower the divine magic in his spells still lagged behind his mother's, but Kia seemed more focused on the martial aspects of her build than Kachai was. If Kia was a paladin, then Kachai was training as a cleric. After all, she's the direct melee fighter of the Guardians, while in the heirs we've got Arl and I for that role. Nathan had been confused by divine mana before the solstice. It was fundamentally different from the kind of magic available to everybody else, though he was just as resistant to it. Nobody seemed to worship any gods on Davrar, though Kachai and Kia sometimes uttered prayers in battle. But at the solstice, he'd learned that one of the endings in the tale of endings was gods, and another was deicide. The obvious implication was that gods had been born into the world of Davrar and broken it. Then they'd existed for thousands upon thousands of years, through 4 other endings, and then another ending had killed them. Or maybe they'd gone mad and needed to be killed to save the world. Nobody knew. The world had ended twice since then. But some measure of their power clearly lingered beyond death, allowing those who kept to the proper rituals and still had faith to access their power thousands of years later. But it's a strange sort of faith. Kachai prays to a god of righteous battle called Damon, but Kia seems to almost pray to herself. It's weird. The heirs kept chatting as they used the transit road to cross endless miles of the ruined city. Its scale was just enormous, comparable to some of the larger cities of Earth. Even with every step taking Nathan dozens of feet across the city, it would take hours for them to reach their patrol area. On the way, they ran into a trading caravan carrying supplies back from the northern villages. It wasn't so much a caravan as a couple of strong traders carrying several large bags of holding a piece. Their builds allowed them to move quickly while carrying a lot of weight, and they were escorted by a team of adventurers. A familiar team of adventurers. Kachai stepped forward and Nathan stepped to the side. Just like last time, he was more than happy to have the intimidating wolfman handle this interaction. Eldred, Kachai said, his tone hard. The big adventurer stood in the center of the road, his arms crossed and plate armor shining nearly as brightly as his bald head. The vanguard, Eldred's team, was grouped up behind him. They looked fearfully at the heirs, darting worried glances at their leader. They were like a bunch of ducklings clustered behind an angry mother duck. Nathan couldn't help but snort at the image. Eldred saw Nathan's derision and his frown intensified before he turned his attention away and responded to the cleric standing in front. "Kache Cordavia, out on a patrol this fine morning." His tone was confrontational, and Nathan noticed Sarah slip her hands into the pouches that contained her weapons. Stella stepped back, and Nathan stepped forward to screen her. He had no idea how a fight on the dimensional transit road would play out. Probably not well for the vanguard. Stella and Sarah could each probably drop all of them in less than 20 seconds if they weren't interrupted. That's where Arl, Kache, and I come in. Kache responded with an iron calm. "Mayhaps. It is a wonderful day to be leaving Gemor. What about yourself?" Eldred snorted disdainfully. "We're just returning, had a pretty good few days, adventuring." He turned and spat on the ground. As proper adventurers do, without throwing what it means to be a Gemor adventurer to the muckgrabber. Like some people here do. He eyed Nathan spitefully and drummed fingers on the dagger at his belt. Nathan gazed back, suppressing his anger with focused mind. It wasn't hard Eldred was an asshole, but Nathan knew he was trying to bait a duel, though it wasn't clear why. Nathan's position was secure. His victorious duel against the leading young star of the traditionalist adventurer faction had seen to that. Honestly, it was likely for Eldred's personal satisfaction and no other reason. He just seemed like that kind of person. Kache didn't say anything, and Nathan noticed Stella open her mouth with a wry look. He just knew she was about to say something biting. But then she closed it and just stood there silently, letting the silence drag on. Probably for the best. After a moment more, Eldred waved his hand dismissively, clearly perturbed he hadn't managed to get a rise out of them. "We'll be on our way as soon as you get out of it." Kache gestured with his head, and the heirs stood to the side of the transit road, not letting down their guards as the vanguard and their escorted traders trooped past. The other team kept an uneasy 20 feet of separation from the heirs on the broad boulevard. The rest of the vanguard looked relieved, and one of them shot Nathan an apologetic look. "Man, it's kind of sad that I don't think we're unreasonable in being prepared for the vanguard to attack us, or at least Eldred. But it is nice to have backing they're afraid of. I hope I get strong enough to beat Eldred in a straight-up duel soon. My weakness to purely physical fighters needs to be addressed." After the vanguard passed, the heirs kept walking north. Nathan reflected that they'd run into the vanguard an awful lot recently. Was it more than coincidence? After a moment of thinking about it, scanning over the other teams he knew and the kinds of jobs that were available, Nathan concluded that it probably was just a coincidence. There weren't really all that many adventurers in Gemor. Only a few dozen teams, and they tended to specialize. Some teams primarily delved into dungeons. Some hunted monsters. The highest-tier teams tended to be held in reserve, both as strategic assets and to be ready to respond to disasters. Most of them were semi-retired and too valuable to risk on mundane jobs. Even a basic monster can kill an elite if it gets lucky, or if the elite isn't paying attention. I do not want to know what a soul eater could do if it took over Kia. The vanguard seemed to be an opportunistic team that acted as a sort of jack of all trades. Their bread and butter was serving as protection for convoys, as they had for the villagers of Pilriden after Nathan, and the giant traders had saved the villagers from the slavers. But they also took on investigation and monster hunting missions. They were opportunists. They tried to snipe the tomb of the magelord from the heirs before the solstice, drawn by the prospect of an easy dungeon. The guild likely wouldn't stick its nose in as long as they weren't stirring up too much trouble and were still accomplishing some number of guild-issued missions. But the consequences for awakening something nasty when you're not on a guild-approved mission are steep. Dismissal, exile, or worse, depending on the damage. If you manage to survive whatever you unleashed in the first place. Anyways, they had a patrol to do. The heirs reached the designated point on the outer wall and surveyed the remains of the northern gatehouse. Their first task was to clear it. The gate itself had collapsed long ago, and the rubble had been cleared off the road, but the remaining ruins had enough space to barrack hundreds of troops, or hide just as many monsters waiting to ambush adventurers and traders traveling the road. They were walking through an upper level of the second of the two gatehouses when Nathan's notice screamed at him. He stopped short and held up a hand signal for the other heirs to stop and prepare for combat. After a second, the detail that had pinged Nathan's attention surfaced into conscious awareness. There were a half-dozen thin gray tendrils hanging down in the doorway ahead of them. Nathan convulsively swallowed as his enhanced memory let him recall the bestiary entry for soul eaters in perfect detail. They can camouflage pretty well on this stone. Those flexible tendrils will stick to anything, and then the soul eater will pull itself towards its victim to do whatever it does to take a person over. Nobody is sure if they kill their hosts or just exert control over them. But they're smart enough that each one will assign itself to a different member of our party if we all go through that door. They'll mimic our normal actions pretty closely for a few days before gestating a new generation, after which they'll use our bodies to sneak into people's homes and deposit their hatchlings under beds and such. Mid-tier notice 8 achieved. Nathan swallowed again to clear his suddenly dry throat. This was why the guards were so careful about checking the auras of people who came into the city. Soul eaters. Stella, I think this is up to you. There were faint intakes of breath among the heirs, and then Stella moved up next to Nathan. He pointed out the tendrils before stepping to the side of the corridor as she cast a spell of air, fire, and force. It looked like she decided that a simple fireball wasn't enough. She was casting her flame lance. After a moment, the stabilized ball of fire hovered in front of her and spewed out a stream of roiling flame. Nathan had seen her cast this spell before. It could make a thin spear of flame capable of melting through stone like a plasma cutter. But that wasn't what she was using the spell for here. The torrent of unfocused fire blasted into the next room and splashed against the far wall, continuing to burn as it spread and consumed everything in the room. Stella panned the flame around, covering the entire room in roiling fire. The heat should have been awful, but because it was a magical fire, Nathan was protected from it. He felt the magical heat, but it was absorbed as fuel for his stamina. Stella had also conjured a shield of force that prevented the heat from reflecting back onto the rest of the heirs. You have leveled up to level 54. Congratulations, your party has killed a nest of soul eaters. Stella didn't let up, keeping the flame going for another 20 seconds before a gesture sent the stabilized ball of flame into the next room, where it detonated. It wasn't a thunderous detonation, just another wave of fire and air hot enough to broil unprotected flesh. Nathan gazed through the doorway. The far wall was glowing slightly from the heat. The dangling threads weren't there anymore, and Nathan extended his spear and waved it through the doorway. There was no response, and so he stepped into the room, keeping his eyes peeled for the gray, crab-like soul eaters. Not a trace of them remained, except for some dark smudges on the wall above the door. He kept looking around, eventually finding a closet on the side of the room. There had been a ratty wooden door that had mostly burned away, and behind that door Nathan found what remained of the nest. Most of the soul eaters had turned into charcoal briquettes, but a few of the ones farther back looked like cooked soft-shell crabs. Goddamn carcinization. I'm magically teleported to another world and still can't avoid species evolving into crabs. He called back his findings, and Stella came forward, flinching from the heat. She directed a smaller stream of fire into the closet before they beat a hasty retreat from the now oven-like set of rooms. Nathan was shaken and took a few deep breaths to center himself as they left the gatehouse. Arl grasped his shoulder, squeezing lightly. Nathan looked back and smiled. "Thanks. Those things give me nightmares. Not sure which part is the worst." Arl nodded and squeezed again before releasing his hand. They took a short break to eat a small meal, then continued on the patrol. It was almost comforting for Nathan to spot a group of water stalkers tailing them after lunch, showing that not all the dangers they faced were quite so terrifying. Some were just six-legged reptilian creatures the size of a pony that could challenge a velociraptor for ferocity, with magical stealth and some inherent elemental magic. With a bit of triangulation from where more stalkers showed up, Nathan figured out their nest's approximate location. They started searching the area until he spotted the imminent ambush outside an old Gemor utility building that seemed to have become the stalker's lair. The heirs went into the block of apartments across the street from the utility building, working their way from building to avoid being jumped in the street. There was a stalker in the third building, but Arl made short work of it in the close quarters. His warning skill was well suited to imminent threats like a stalker jumping around the corner, and he jammed the force-aspected saber into the stalker's mouth and activated the enchantment to nearly split the monster in half longways. Then they were looking across the street at the stalker's lair. About a dozen of the magical creatures were hiding in doorways, behind windows and on rooftops, waiting for the heirs to emerge. The other members of the heirs couldn't pinpoint the stalkers' exact positions behind the magical stealth, but Stella didn't need to. Nathan pointed out the general positions, and after a moment of squinting, Stella nodded. She cocked her head and thought for a moment before snapping her fingers. "I want to try something." Stella and Sarah positioned themselves a few paces back from the doorway, readying to fire through it. Nathan and Kachai stood to the sides, out of the line of fire but ready to block the door if necessary. Arl was making sure no stalkers snuck up behind them. Stella took nearly 15 seconds of careful manipulation to cast her spell, building a growing ball of silently sparking lightning in her palm. She cast it across the street into the yawning darkness of the main entrance to the utility building. As the orb left Stella's hands, it suddenly started snapping and popping like a Tesla coil. Filaments of electricity latched onto the enemies waiting in the darkened space, outlining them in a short-lived nimbus of baleful power. The rest of the stalkers didn't take kindly to the spell and leapt from their hiding places to charge the heirs in their fortified position. Nathan tensed himself, ready to leap out and hold the door against the onslaught. The monsters met a hail of bullets. Sarah emptied first one revolver and then the other, sending a dozen bullets into half as many stalkers. None made it within 15 feet of the door. Stella waved away the plume of foul-smelling smoke with a simple wind spell. The heirs examined the scene of carnage for a silent moment. The only sound was Sarah slapping fresh rounds into her guns with a pair of autoloaders. Nathan took a few strides outside, focused on the open door across the street. The magical stealth effect had faded, and Nathan could make out the slumped forms of stalkers within, their magical third eyes having burst. Doesn't look like there was a patriarch this time. After a moment, the rest of the heirs joined Nathan in the street, looking around at shattered skulls and the craters of bullet wounds as Sarah collected her spent brass. Kachai was the first to speak. "I feel as useful as boot polish on sandals. You have leveled up to level 55. Congratulations, your party has killed a nest of water stalkers." Chapter 5, Old Rivals. New friends. The heirs had completed their patrol and were walking back to the guild. They still had their guard up but were feeling good after a successful assignment. It was certainly more satisfying than the patrol of a few days back where they hadn't found a thing. Nathan looked back at Arl and Kachai. I expect you to have leveled just as much as I did today, which is not much. Arl rolled his eyes and raised 3 fingers. Kachai nodded. Yes, I received 1 level for each encounter, but it is to be expected. It is difficult to approach level 81 slaying foes such as stalkers, and I believe I am still the highest level of us all. Kachai turned with a clink of armor to survey Stella and Sarah. How much did each of you level? Sarah responded with a crooked smile. More than that. 1 for the soul eaters, 6 for the stalkers. Stella was more enthusiastic. 4 for the soul eaters, 4 for the stalkers. I think I'm catching up. My level up prompt called out my use of electricity to slay foes weak to that magic. I think that'll help with my class development. That made sense. Davra rewarded risks and using diverse capabilities in combat situations. Nathan reflected on his own levels. Yeah, that was an unusually eventful patrol. If we did just patrols like that, it would take 11 more for me to get to level 81, and at every other week that would be about half a year. But I need to keep in mind that that's 11 patrols where everything goes right and we fight monsters. Our patrol 2 days ago didn't have anything. So, a few years, assuming we don't get injured or take a break. He opened his mouth to give voice to a thought he'd had earlier. Doesn't it seem unusual we're being sent out on so many patrols? I thought the standard tempo was a lot less frequent. I think the guildmistress is trying to push us to level 81 as quickly as possible, Sarah answered. But yes, it is common for teams to spend more time resting, training, and recuperating than is necessary for us. But we have powerful magic, she indicated Stella. Effective healing, Kachai nodded back. Powerful ranged and melee combatants, she gestured between Arl and herself. And a relic up our sleeve with you, Nathan. What kills people is unexpected threats and strange magic, and your perception skills and magic fuckery fill in our gaps. Nathan looked back over the airs, proud of all of them. Well, let's live up to their expectations of us, onwards and upwards. The heirs all agreed, and they returned to Gemor as night fell. High-tier earnestness 2 achieved. Neat. I've been lightly using that skill a lot recently. They ate a late dinner in the guild hall, trading stories with some other adventurers. Some recent graduates were gathered around, asking about the encounter with the soul eaters. It's not just me that finds those things terrifying. People want to hear as much about them as they can, either out of morbid fascination or a desire to be as prepared as possible. Nathan was telling the detailed version of the story to Nornan and the rest of the Dust Eaters, focusing especially on what the filaments dangling from the door had looked like. Nornan had cracked a few jokes at the start, but now he was deadly serious, asking questions and probing for every detail Nathan could give him. He was taking notes in a slim notebook, scribbling in a tiny hand as he listened. That must have been expensive. They only get proper paper from ocean-going traders beyond Litcliffe, and I'm not particularly interested in trying to start a paper mill here. And what did they smell like? Nornan asked. Nathan frowned, thinking back. He hadn't been paying attention to their scent until after Stella's spell, at which point the room had mostly smelled like hot stone and charred wood. But before that, had there been a distinctive smell? There'd been the smell of rot and stagnant water and a faintly acrid smell, like a rancid puddle of fat. He described it to Nornan, who took careful notes. Nornan's catfolk teammates, Ukrik and Inarl, asked Nathan more questions about the smell, trying to tease out details. Nathan searched his memory, doing his best to give more accurate answers and detailed descriptions. They accepted his answers, and Inarl commented that Nathan had a good sense of smell for a human. I guess notice applies to that too. I'm glad they asked. It really wouldn't have percolated up to my conscious brain if they hadn't walked me through it in such detail. High-tier enhanced memory 2 achieved. He nodded at the Dust Eaters. I hadn't considered the smell to be such an important part of scouting, but I can see that it is something I'm going to need to practice. Thanks. Nornan returned Nathan's nod. "And I thank you for the description, Nathan. We plan to spend most of our time down south around the villages of our birth, so we are unlikely to run into soul eaters. But it is always better to learn from those who have faced such foes in person. Maybe we will call upon you to join us if we find a threat worthy of the heirs of Gemor." Nornan held out his hand for Nathan to shake. Somebody pushed between them, knocking Nornan's hand aside. "I don't know why you would bother. The heirs are a disgrace to the guild." It was Simla, and his tone was vicious. Nornan's face fell and he looked peeved. "Simla, you lost this argument in the ring. Don't smother our fire." That duel carried weight, and the story of the solstice duel shall be told in the same breath as the heir's oath, the oath of endings. Be happy with that fame, for your name will carry no more, and that is due to your actions. Nathan blinked in surprise. There was no way Nornan would have dared speak to Simla this way before the solstice. He'd lost his status in the guild. Simla just sneered. "You mean the oath of idiots. The heirs are going to die crushed by a weight too heavy to lift, and we will be better for it." He turned to Nathan, posturing aggressively. Nathan didn't want to bother with this. Simla hadn't been kicked out of the guild for attacking Nathan with a magical explosive during an explicitly non-lethal duel, but that was mostly because it hadn't even slowed Nathan down. Simla is a capable adventurer who is loyal to Gemor, even if he's an asshole about it. But the real reason Simla was still in the guild was because he was the primary young representative of the traditionalists, who had exerted their influence on the matter, and expended it. Nathan was pretty sure that several groups of adventurers had switched sides over the whole affair, and that Sudriel was implementing even more of her innovations into the guild structure than before, like controlling the assignments of the newly graduated adventurers. She backed me the whole way, and I returned the favor by winning the duel and not demanding Simla's exile for the lethal attack. Now she's leveling us and letting us pick our own missions as a thank you. If going out on so many missions and patrols is a reward, I don't want to know what a punishment looks like." After an awkward moment of Simla glaring at Nathan, Nornan stepped around the regal-looking young man and shook Nathan's hand anyway. Nornan shot a judgmental look at Simla. "See you later, Nathan. Good hunting." Both the old rival and the new friend departed. The heir's next stop was at the front desk to claim their next job. They returned to their suite to prepare for a longer trip the next morning. It was time to go deal with an errant spellbook. They left the city without trouble, the guard shooting Nathan a gimlet eye. They'd worked out an arrangement to check in on him frequently to be sure he didn't sneak a soul eater into the city. He appreciated it. The guard were grumpy as only a bureaucratic organization needing to make an exception could be, but they still accommodated his needs. It would have been funnier if they weren't planning around the possibility of Nathan being turned into a flesh puppet. Nathan hadn't been west of Gemor before, and was interested to see Firewatch peek up close. The peak was just visible from Gemor, but the smoking bulk grew quickly as they progressed along the transit road. It stood next to a river and far away from any other mountains, and the weird placement made Nathan's D&D senses twitch. There has to be a dungeon under that, or a dragon sleeping in a lava pool or something, or all of the above. We probably shouldn't poke it. Yet, I don't want to set off the volcano by accident. Maybe when Stella is high enough level to control a volcanic eruption. They quickly passed through Old Gemor and out into the short stretch of grasslands that separated the ruins from the start of the forest. The ash cone that sheltered Firewatch was just ahead. Another path led off to the right towards the town of Riverbank. However, the heirs traveled straight. They were walking alongside the remnants of the transit road, which gradually petered out now that they were beyond Old Gemor. They ignored the turn that led up to Firewatch, waving at the scout in the tower atop the cinder cone. The heirs wanted to at least reach the town of Tenby, which was sheltered in a craggy valley on the edge of the forest. It'd be a good stopping point, safe and secure. They didn't want to have to camp out in the open. It would be an unnecessary risk. As was growing to be their habit on the road, the heirs asked Nathan of Earth. He'd been telling them of the broad arc of Western history, Greece and Alexander the Great, Rome and Carthage. They found it fascinating to hear of history which had happened so long ago. On Davrar, history only lasted until an ending. The only history they had was that of Gemor, and Giant's Rest before it, stretching back several hundred years. And now that Nathan's secret was out, they didn't have to hide things from every passing ear. Nathan wasn't in a hurry to describe Roman military tactics or siege engines to people outside the heirs, but he didn't need to hide that he was from elsewhere anymore. He'd won the right to wear that secret proudly, without explaining any more than he wanted to. They reached Tenby in the late afternoon and decided not to push on towards Bridgeguard. They wouldn't make it before nightfall. The forest was dangerous after dark, replete with threats ranging from silver darters to striped wolves and siege boars. Tenby was a nice enough village, built into an old temple-like building carved out of the stone at the bottom of a deep ravine. The structure looked like a dungeon, but it had been cleared and put to use to house the village. A stream wove around the ancient structure, and then tumbled deep into the earth at the very bottom of the gaping crevasse. The area was humid and moist, with multiple layers of tough palisade covering the difficult path down into the ravine. Beyond that, a single pair of sturdy stone doors blocked access to the subterranean village. Tenby did a lot of logging, sending wood for building and burning back to Gemor, though they also foraged and hunted in the semi-tamed forest near the village. From what Nathan saw, logging was a subtle process, with a team of adventurers protecting and helping the woodcutters as they harvested a subset of the trees. They weren't clear-cutting, but instead thinning the woods, turning it from a dense primordial domain to an airy forest with longer sight lines, and without proliferating undergrowth. The team of adventurers they met inside the village was appropriately called the woodcutters, who were stationed in Tenby permanently. Their leader was an enormous woman named Dilmu Ticorno, and after greeting them, she invited the heirs to dinner in her house. Her entire team had married into the village and were only technically still part of the Adventurers Guild. Dilmu led the heirs into a comfortable home that occupied a set of rooms near to the thick stone door that protected the village. Her family was clustered around a large table as the heirs entered, and they squished together to make room as Dilmu's spouse brought out more seating and set out extra utensils. Nathan found himself seated across from a youth of about 12 who looked at the heirs with starstruck eyes. "You're adventurers. Do you go into dungeons and fight things for treasure and glory?" She looked at Nathan's rough clothes and complete lack of magic items. "You don't look like an adventurer, not like they do." She pointed at Stella's enchanted robes and Kachai's gleaming armor. Dilmu interrupted with a very fake cough. "I would remind you that one of your mothers is an adventurer." The kid rolled her eyes. "Yeah, but your mom, that doesn't count, and you don't do dungeons or go to Gemor." Dilmu raised her eyebrows. "I was at Gemor for the solstice." She gestured to the heirs. "I saw this team become adventurers. Hear me, that was an event." Dilmu pointed at Nathan. "He is the most blasphemously adventurous of us all. He dueled Simla Bola, old Khazar's nephew, and threw him right out of the arena." She mimed the way Nathan had grabbed Simla's ankle and hurled him, then laughed a deep belly laugh. "I do not know the details of what Simla spoke, but that was a duel deserved and a proper outcome. The heirs are a team to watch, and I think we can learn from their fire." "What an oath!" Dilmu's wife interrupted with clapped hands. "Let us speak of quieter things, and maybe you can answer some questions about the training course. My daughters want their path to lead to adventuring, even if I was so lucky as to pry Dilmu out of it," she grumbled. Arl leaned forward with a smirk. Well, let me tell you how much studying you will need to do. There is this thing called math. The rest of the dinner passed with mirth and laughter. It was a nice time and showed Nathan more of the character of the villages. They were rough places on the edge of civilization, but the people within them lived lives of growth and progress. The heirs left the next morning, bidding goodbye to Dilmu and her team. They'd slept comfortably in the damp barracks building after Stella had used some magic to effectively heat the chilly stone room where they'd bunked. Dilmu had wanted to chat about the job that had brought the heirs out here. Tenby didn't have a mage who could cast message back to Gemor, and they depended on traders and adventurers for news. After hearing about the heir's job in the enchanted book, Dilmu had shaken her head. Couldn't bribe me to do that job with a dragon's egg. The Drakefish River carries bad things down its course. The headwaters lie in a cursed place, and dangers of many origins come from there. She clapped Koch on the shoulder. But I wish you luck, for somebody needs to deal with the river's detritus. My recommendation is to cast the book back into the river, and to not die. She let loose another belly laugh, and with that they were gone and traveling through the forest. It wasn't too far to Bridgewatch, but the path did not run straight, detouring around several areas of dense trees and avoiding the base of Firewatch Peak. The forest around them was dark and deep, and Nathan felt as if they were on a patrol through a dangerous region of Old Gemor. He kept his eyes peeled, watching the shadowed undergrowth carefully. At one point he thought he saw several sets of eyes watching them from a deep patch of shadow. Nathan called it out, pointing to the spot. As soon as he did, the eyes vanished and did not reappear. Nathan sniffed the air, remembering his intention to lean on that sense more. After a moment of concentration, he picked up a musky scent tinged with carrion over the dead leaf smell of the forest. They arrived in Bridgewatch at midday, and Nathan took a moment to survey the place as the heirs came around a thick patch of trees. The first thing that caught his eye was the bridge. It was a massive edifice of gray stone, arching high above the murky Drakefish River in a single, impossible span that covered nearly half a mile before touching down on the far bank. The construction was hundreds of feet across and paved with stones identical to the transit roads of Old Gemor. Nathan knew it didn't have the same space-compressing properties, but it was still a potent work of magic to remain pristine after so long. Note to self: try not to break the bridge. The town of Bridgeguard was hunkered to the side of the bridge, surrounded by sturdy walls of dark basaltic stone that looked to be from the nearby volcano. The town butte up against the river, and Nathan could see some small piers where sturdy-looking fishing boats would dock, though they were currently out fishing in the river. Oddly, the piers were not enclosed in the walls, and the wall facing the river seemed even sturdier than the rest of it, with multiple towers and heavy fortifications. A second wall reached out from the town and spanned the foot of the bridge, looking small and flimsy next to the gracefully rising arched stone. As Nathan grew closer, he realized that flimsy wall was still 20 feet tall with crenellations and sturdy supports, not something to be taken lightly, unless you can fly. As he drew closer, Nathan could see that there was stone scattered around the base of the wall. This didn't look like debris from construction. Most of the pieces were small and arranged like somebody had blasted their way through the stone edifice. It looks like the wall has been destroyed and rebuilt a few times. Probably a lot easier with earth magic than it would be otherwise. It looked like they had been spotted. A human man waved to the heirs from a tower on the wall near the main gate into the town. The heirs headed there and met the man as he came down to greet them. He spoke quickly, overriding Kachai's greeting. "Freedom and brightness upon you. I'm Forest Dudisk, leader of the Forest Rangers. Our mage got a message you were heading this way to deal with our artifact problem. I'd be happy to guide the way, but we've had a scare from a river cutter and are trying to bait it into range before it goes for the boats." Forrest jerked his head back to the riverbank, and Nathan noticed a few people out on the docks cautiously throwing things into the water. Forrest pointed upriver. "The book's about a mile in that direction, right on the riverbank. Very obvious." He grimaced. "It's surrounded by magical crystals and an unnatural fog. We're not able to deal with it and won't be much help if you call. Good luck." With that, he turned and started trotting back towards the docks. The heirs looked at each other. Kachai shrugged, a bit confused by the rapid-fire greeting. "It seems they do not desire our help. I suppose we shall go upriver. Better to deal with this in daylight, and a few hours remain to us." Everybody else shrugged their acceptance. So the heirs turned and walked past Bridgeguard and up the river, careful to keep some distance from the potentially dangerous bank. Nathan reached for his pack. It always helped to be prepared. For him, that meant chowing down on some tasty jerky. Chapter 6, Strange Readings. The heirs marched alongside the Drakefish River north of Bridgeguard, following a path that snaked along the bank. The Drakefish was broad and placid, flowing sluggishly southwards towards the ocean. There were places where the bank was dominated by thick reeds, and others where the murky waters lapped up against a muddy beach. The forest here wasn't as dense as the area near Tenby Village. The path traced a narrow line of turf that separated the river from the woods. Nathan was curious about why the path existed, but it probably wasn't important. Hunters or something. There aren't any villages in this direction. They walked for a time, alert so as not to miss their quarry. Then they came around a bend in the riverbank and saw the place the book must have washed up. As Forrest had said, it was quite obvious. There were blue, glowing crystals sprouting in a rough circle about 50 feet across, some standing nearly at Nathan's height. They spanned the riverbank, with some barely broaching the water line while others were positioned a short distance into the forest. An ethereal fog rolled out from the crystals, lit with some kind of inner glow. The fog was low to the ground and occasionally roiled with inner movement, as if hidden things were scuttling within it. The heirs stopped as one and looked over the crystals. Arl was the first to comment. "Now that's a message to stay a bowshot away if ever I saw one." Stella frowned at the circle, drawing her eyebrows down in thought. "I think some of those crystals are arranged at the nodes of a ritual diagram. It's hard to tell from the side, but there are more crystals than you would need for nodes." "That's probably a prophecy of death." Nathan squinted to see what Stella meant. He wasn't educated on magical rituals and couldn't understand the exact pattern, but he could at least tell there was a magically significant diagram there thanks to his skills. He tried to focus and use his antimagic to see past the fog, but nothing became clearer. "I think it's just normal fog, and something in it is glowing. I can usually see through illusions if I concentrate on them." Sarah snorted and pulled out her rifle. "Should I break one and find out what happens? Our goal here is to learn how to engage with strange magics." Kachai said, looking at Nathan for approval. "I say we see if shattering the crystals from here kills the problem. Likely better to do that without magic, and it will be safer to be farther away if a terrible defense activates." Nathan shrugged but nodded in agreement. "If we can interfere with whatever is happening from a distance, that's probably for the best, but we do it safely. I'll stay here. You should all retreat to the cover of those trees and prepare for retaliation." Nathan pointed to a small stand of sturdy trees a short distance behind them. The heirs were all on board with the plan. They talked over a few more contingency plans and then retreated. Nathan handed his spear to Arl. He was pretty sure it wasn't going to be useful here. "And if the crystals try to disintegrate me or something, it'd be a shame to lose it." Nathan stood to the side, ready to dive for the cover of the riverbank. He darted a glance into the river. He couldn't see very far into its muddy depths, but nothing seemed out of place. The blue-white arcane crystals disrupted a scene otherwise dominated by the green of the forest and the brown of the river. Nathan looked back. observing the heirs as they set up behind the trees. Stella conjured a force barrier that reached diagonally from the ground to a large tree with a small gap close to the ground. Sarah lay down and pointed the rifle out of the gap, aiming towards the crystals. Katja stood nearby, ready to block any attacks with his shield, while Arl and Stella hid behind the trees. Sarah raised a hand signal, asking if Nathan was ready. He signaled affirmative, and Sarah leaned over the rifle. Nathan turned back to the crystals, and after a moment, a loud crack rang out. The top third of one of the taller crystals shattered and fell to the ground, and the glow of the entire arrangement faltered for a moment. Then a low whine accompanied the formation of a force dome. It was faint at first, but over the course of a few seconds it solidified into a nearly opaque opalescent barrier that completely encased the crystals. The dome touched down just beyond the outermost circle of crystals, which now glowed brightly. The whine intensified until it was almost painful, and Nathan noticed that tiny crystals were spreading out from the bottom edge of the dome, creeping across the grass and up the surfaces of trees. That would look like Tiberium if it were green instead of blue-white. No other response was immediately forthcoming, and Nathan looked back to see Sarah leaning back over the rifle. She fired again, and the huge bullet bounced off of the shield right over one of the outermost glowing crystals. The shield rippled around the impact point but soon stabilized. Stella stepped out from behind the force wall and cast a lightning bolt that narrowly missed Nathan, impacting the same point of the shield. The shield took this attack with even more aplomb, and there was barely any indication of strain from the powerful barrier. There was barely a moment of warning. A crystal just inside the shield suddenly shone brightly, then a beam of bluish energy shot towards Stella. Nathan shot out a hand like a soccer goalie, managing to interpose his limb in the path of the beam. The blue light coalesced around his hand, and a large crystal started to form from nothing. The crystals started growing into his flesh, spreading all the way up to his shoulder as larger chunks materialized and stuck to his arm. Ah, what the hell? Nathan calmed down, feeling out the magical process. The crystal was already starting to disintegrate from contact with his flesh, and it was similar to something Nathan had experienced not too long ago. This feels a bit like the salt mana that I found in some of the conductive quartz Dalo gave me. Crystal mana. I guess there are weirder mana types. Crystal mana felt like dozens of edges poking into Nathan's skin in a regular pattern. The spell kept trying to grow a giant crystal around Nathan's hand, even as his magic absorption siphoned power from the spell. Crystals formed on the surface of his skin, protruding both inwards and outwards. You know, growing crystals into people's bodies is a pretty scary attack. Suddenly, another beam shot out, targeting Nathan directly. It hit him in the chest, and the crystals tore open his shirt and started growing into his heart and lungs. Nathan focused, throwing his attention into figuring out a countermeasure against this new spell and mana type. This crystal grows in orderly patterns, one layer on top of another, all made of magic. If I attack the crystal's growth surface, I can poison it and prevent it from growing into me. Nathan smashed at the growing crystals with his antimagic, not directly trying to absorb the mana so much as prevent the new mana from properly aligning with the structure. The approach immediately bore fruit, with the crystalline growth halting and the remaining mana quickly absorbing into Nathan's stamina. The cavities left behind soon filled in with new flesh. Another beam hit Nathan in the face. It was incredibly uncomfortable to feel crystals growing into his eyeballs, but Nathan kept his focus and shattered the spell again. The process became more and more automatic each time as his talent adapted to the attack. Another beam hit him in the gut, and this one was even easier to disrupt, barely slowing him down. Nathan was starting to get the overcharged feeling of stamina overload and looked back at the heirs. They'd made a hasty retreat behind the trees, which sported a few nasty crystal growths from more beams that Nathan hadn't seen. The attacks appeared to have penetrated Stella's force barrier, which made sense since they could leave the crystal's dome. Nathan's rage urged him to charge that dome, to bash down the barrier and engage at close quarters with whatever the hell was going on in there. The inside of the dome was filling with glowing mist, and Nathan could see that the crystals outside it were quickly growing to ankle height. It might be now or never if it's growing up a protective barrier. But he didn't activate his rage. Instead, he turned and ran back towards the heirs. He needed advice. He needed to not go in half-cocked and without a plan. They wanted to learn how to counter this sort of thing, and Nathan charges it without a plan wasn't a good counter. High-tier focused mind 9 achieved. Nathan rounded the corner of Stella's force shield and saw the heirs crouched a ways back from their tree barrier. Arl was crushing some crystals that had started to spread like some kind of spiky slime mold. A bite of crystal had been taken out of Kachai's shield, but he wasn't paying much attention to it as Stella used a force construct to grab a spike of crystal that was sticking out of Sarah's shoulder. She yanked out the spike and vaporized it with a burst of fire. Sarah gritted her teeth as faint slivers of crystal continued to form in the wound like a frost pattern on her skin. Nathan leapt forward and seized her shoulder, doing his best to break the spell on his teammate. It was hard since he wasn't the target of the spell. Nathan spent a dozen seconds trying to exert the influence of his antimagic beyond his skin and into her wound before giving up. With a quick word of apology, he stuck a finger into Sarah's shoulder. She nodded and held back a scream. Nathan wriggled his finger around to ensure there wasn't any more crystal mana in the wound before stepping back and allowing Kachai to heal the injury. Once everyone was taken care of, Nathan looked back at the heirs. "Well, we learned a lot and didn't die. What do we do now?" Arl glanced back from where he was examining the trees they were hiding behind. "I don't think we can approach or even get into sight. This is your nemesis to slay." Kachai nodded, grinding out a response. "Agreed." Nathan stuck his head out around the tree, studying the area and ducking back to dodge another crystal-forming beam. The dome was still up and the mist inside roiled. The crystals surrounding the dome had grown to knee-height, and the creeping edge of the growth was slowly approaching them. He looked back. "I don't know if I can get in there. The ground is nasty, and I don't trust there to not be another trick with the crystals or the dome. I can probably handle any surprises, but I don't like probably." Stella finished vaporizing another patch of crystal that had encroached around the trees. "We need to think in more dimensions," she said. "It's building a barrier, and there are multiple layers of crystals to pass through to reach the center. I could just throw Nathan at the center of the circle, bypassing all the other layers. I'm almost certain the book is in there. Breaking that should stop everything else." Nathan eyed the short mage as she formed a solid platform from the muddy ground. "There's some assumptions there, that the book is in the center of the circle, and that breaking it will stop this. Can we wait until it runs out of mana?" Kachai almost looked around the corner of the tree before he stopped himself. Waiting for it to run out of mana would be the most uncertain option. We would be relying on our opponent making a mistake. This all started from a single artifact, and it seems the artifact is the key. Stella's plan is a good option to take it out quickly. Do it. I guess throwing Nathan at the problem is how we're going to solve this. At least I'll come in on an unanticipated vector. Nathan nodded, waiting for Stella to gesture him onto the platform. After another 20 seconds of careful manipulation, she did. He stepped onto the hard-packed mud. "Throwing me high is more important than throwing me accurately. I can fix the accuracy." Stella acknowledged his point and counted down with her fingers as they'd practiced. Nathan crouched, pushing off the platform as Stella hurled him skywards. He shot upwards on a trajectory that overshot the force dome and would land him in the river beyond. Nathan tried to use his new talent to adjust his trajectory, but nothing happened. There was a moment of panic before Nathan figured it out. He wasn't falling yet. The talent only worked when he was falling, and he was still going up. Nathan studied the landscape under him for a scant few seconds as the wind rushed past his face. The crystal growth was spreading towards the airs in a fan shape. From above, Nathan could see the shape of the ritual symbol delineated by the crystals more clearly. There were conduits in the fog that burned with arcane energy, marking out a complicated pattern whose nodes were crystal obelisks shining brightly through the shield. The center of the circle was clear, but an area just to the side seemed to be the locus of the ritual with the brightest glow. Nathan tried to squint past the magical light, but he couldn't make anything out through the shield and the glare. Then he hit the top of his arc and started to descend. Nathan immediately increased his fall speed, cutting short the arc that would have sent him into deep water. He laughed maniacally as the wind rushed through his hair, and he aimed right for the bright glow. The slow fall shifted his trajectory to match where he wanted to go. It burned stamina quickly, but not nearly as quickly as regeneration. His rage activated smoothly as Nathan descended from the sky. It felt like a natural extension of his adrenaline, the thrill of battle coursing through him as he flashed towards the ground. He wasn't angry at the crystals, but he was looking forward to the thrill of tearing them apart with his bare hands after falling out of the sky. I'd be a shoo-in for a Red Bull sponsorship with these stunts. Crystallization beams shot out at Nathan, but had no effect beyond messing up his clothes. He increased the speed of his fall, remembering the effect of his antimagic momentum and Juggernaut's inertia. The faster he moved, the harder he was to stop. Broken legs, who cares? They'll get better. He slammed feet first into the dome, which had been reinforced with glowing filaments of crystal, forming a fractal structure just inside the surface. The dome wrestled with Nathan's momentum for a split second, trying to remain an impenetrable barrier. But against Nathan's antimagic and the skills that synergized off his speed, the force construct was helpless. It exploded, sending crystal shards zipping in all directions. Tiny shards peppered Nathan, slicing his skin and penetrating deeply in a few places. A pressure wave washed over him, trying to blow him away from the dome. But his momentum and control of his fall won out, and he thumped to the ground right next to the brightest crystal. High-tier slow fall 3 achieved. His neck had been sliced open by a flying shard, and blood gouted over the crystal in front of Nathan as he slammed his elbow into the tall object. There was a crack as the magic inside gave way, but the glow of the bottom half redoubled and the crystal grew at an incredible rate, seeking to entomb him. Nathan stepped forward on a broken ankle, getting in closer to the crystal to give it a bear hug. The crystal's growth was inhibited by his blood, though he wasn't sure if that was because it held residual antimagic or because blood tarnished the clean surfaces that encouraged crystal growth. Soon Nathan was surrounded by crystals growing from every direction. Many of them seemed to spontaneously form from the air, encasing him in a rapidly expanding glassy prison. There was a moment where Nathan was fully encased in crystal. It tried to invade his body, poking at his skin and limiting his breathing. Nathan's neck had healed over and the dazed feeling of blood loss waned. He checked his stamina. Stamina, 624-680. My antimagic should win. I can break this spell, let's just push harder. Nathan flexed his muscles, cycling his antimagic along with his movements. The crystal around him cracked but rapidly reformed and continued its constricting advance. His rage was limiting his ability to think, so Nathan dropped it and swapped to focused mind. It's adding magic to an existing lattice structure, rejoining the layers whenever I form a crack. The spell is quickly conjuring new material into the same structure, using the surface that's already present to grow quickly. If I only make a hairline fracture, then it's very simple for it to realign and keep growing. Nathan's spell sense told him he was correct. So how do I break it? I need to do something to the overall lattice structure or cause gross damage. I can't build up enough momentum pinned like this. Can I poison the internal lattice with my antimagic and not just the surface? Make the microscopic structure unstable multiple layers deep. Mid-tier identify 7 achieved. Nathan couldn't extend his antimagic very far, but he slipped it into the crystal around him, trying to integrate the antimagic into the organized structure of the magical material. When he flexed again, the crystal around him shattered like sugar, absorbing into his skin and evaporating to nothingness. Magic absorption 7 achieved. It took conscious effort to keep the effect going, but Nathan closed his arms around the central crystal of the array. The blue glow lessened by inches as Nathan crushed through the structure. As the glare lessened, Nathan finally spotted his target. A great tome of a book made of faceted gemstones rested on the ground. This central crystal had grown out of it. Nathan bent down, pushing through the crystals as they redoubled their attempts to stab through his eyes and skin. The book was entombed in crystal, but its translucent pages were turning regardless. They stilled on a complicated diagram. The crystal growth stopped, and an enormous force tried to push Nathan away. It was a combination of force and gravity magic, both of which Nathan had had prior experience with. He struggled with the spell for a moment, anchoring himself with Davrar's non-magical gravity to avoid pinwheeling away through the suddenly shattered crystal. Then he broke through the spell and grabbed hold of the book, slamming it closed.